Welcome to Walking Through the Word for today. If you remember, at the beginning of John, we talked about that one of the themes that we were going to see in this gospel was Jesus is greater than. And we saw that Jesus was greater than John the Baptist in a couple of verses. We saw that Jesus was greater than everything in the first few verses of John. Well, today in John chapter 6, we're going to do a little bit of an overview before we get into some of the details. But today we are going to discover that Jesus is greater than Moses. And you're saying, now wait a minute, Jeremy. Nowhere in this chapter does it talk about Moses. In fact, Jeremy, it was the previous chapter, chapter 5, at the end of it when Jesus brings up Moses. And you're exactly right. But this is not on accident. Go back to John chapter 5, and if you look, you'll see in verses 45, 46, and 47, Jesus brings out an explicit mention of Moses. And he says, "But do not think I will accuse you before the Father. Your accuser is Moses." Remember, Moses is the bringer of the law. Remember this part, down from the mountain, on whom your hopes are set. If you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But since you do not believe what he wrote, how are you going to believe what I say? Now, we go immediately into John chapter 6, and it's no accident that the writer John brought that statement before he wrote chapter 6, because we're going to see in this that Jesus is greater than Moses. And we're going to see it in the first 4 verses that the tone is being set to compare Jesus and Moses. So let's kind of get into it here for a second. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias. John's the only one that calls it that. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Now, this is actually an allusion to Moses. You say, now, what are you talking about? Let me ask you something. Did anybody follow Moses out into wilderness? You would say, why? Yes, Jeremy, they actually did. They followed Moses out of Egypt into the wilderness. Now, why did they follow Moses out into the wilderness? Well, because of the signs that they saw in Egypt. This great crowd of people is following Jesus into a wilderness. That's what's happening in the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. And they saw signs he had performed by healing the sick. So we're getting some Moses set up. And you say, now hold on, Jeremy, this is stretching it a little bit. All right, fair enough. Well, let's go to the next verse. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside. Did Moses ever go up on a mountainside? Why, yes, he sure did. And what did he do when he went up to the mountainside? He revealed God to the people of Israel, and he revealed God's law. What is it that Jesus came to do? He came to fulfill the law. He said that the law will never be removed. I have come to fulfill every, in our own parlance, dot and tittle of the law. Okay, so Jesus is going up on the mountainside, much like Moses did. And then verse 4, here's the kicker. The Jewish Passover festival was near. I say, Jeremy, what does that have to do with Moses? Well, do you remember what the final sign that finally freed the people of Egypt was for Moses? It was the first Passover. The whole point of celebrating Passover is to remember when the angel of death came and killed all of the firstborns in the country, the nation of Egypt. So we have here some very on-purpose parallels. It was not an accident that John brought up Moses in the previous verses. Now remember, we put chapters and verses in. The original text did not have chapters and verses. So this would have been one continued idea. So we bring up Moses, and then we have these visual parallels that are setting up the scene for what's about to happen in the first part of chapter 6. And that is that Jesus is supposed to be compared to Moses. Now, why would John want to compare Jesus and Moses? Well, very simply, because Moses has been considered the greatest Jew of all time. He would be like George Washington for the people of America. I mean, you look around and you can't go to a state, you can't go anywhere without having some kind of reference to George Washington. It just is. He is considered the first and greatest president of all time. This is the same thing with Moses. Moses was the first leader and the greatest leader by whom everyone else was compared. Moses was a true man of God. And so for Jesus to be compared to Moses, and not only be compared to Moses, but be shown to be greater than Moses, is a very important step in showing exactly who Jesus is. So here's what I want you to do. Now that I've given you a little bit of an overview, I want you to read through John chapter 6. Specifically, read John chapter 6 all the way up until verse 59. And I want you to see if you can come up with any comparisons between Jesus and Moses. And I have no doubt if you find them, you'll also discover why the writer is trying to show Jesus and show that Jesus is truly greater than Moses.